Welcome to the 11th year of the Arizona State University Global Silicon Valley Partners Summit. Thanks to everyone who is listening now from wherever in the world you might be accessing this presentation. I'm Julia Rosen, Managing Director of Global Academic Partnerships for Arizona State University. And it's my great pleasure to bring together a fantastic group of panelists to discuss higher education capacity around the world. So first with me is Doug Becker, CEO of Santana Education and founder of Laureate Education. Will you wave again, Doug, there? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Julie Cram, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Economic Growth, Education and Environment, U.S. Government Special Coordinator for International Basic Education Assistance, and Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment with United States Agency for International Development. So basically, Julie knows everything about everything. So thank you very much for being with us today, Julie. Then we have Guillermo Elizondo, who is the CEO and co-founder of Territorium Life, and he's based in Monterrey, Mexico. And Shai, who is the founder and president of University of the People. And Shai, I think you're based in New York or Tel Aviv or someplace, in between. So I think for all of you listening, you'll find that this panelist represents not only multiple geographies, but different approaches, both public and private, to how we look at increasing the amount and the quality of higher education capacity around the world. We have some of those who represent the system, and that would be Julie from the US federal government and me from a state university in the United States. Then we have very disruptive thinkers and business models represented by Shai Reshef at University of the People and Carlos Elizondo from Territorium Life. And then I'd say I'd put Doug Becker in the middle at Santana Education, right? Kind of straddling both working with the system and really looking at it in a new way and bringing a disruptive perspective. So let me start with you, Julie. Could I ask you at a high level, how does USAID approach capacity building for tertiary education? I mean, do you guys look at geographies, and how do you look at socioeconomic indicators? I mean, how do you look at such a huge issue from where you sit? You're on mute. Yeah, thank you.
First off, Julia, thank you so much for having us all here. Higher education and our partnerships, both with institutions like ASU and universities, as well as some of the disruptors that are on our panel today, as well as more traditional partners, are hugely important to us. So just thrilled to be here talking about our higher education capacity development, which is what your question was about. USAID has a really long history of strengthening capacity in higher education institutions and everywhere we work. And in particular, local capacity development is a critical area for us and is really the cornerstone of what we call our journey to self-reliance. At USAID, a big part of what we're trying to do is work ourselves out of a job. And of course, helping our partner countries on that journey to their own self-reliance is a big part of that. So we're currently looking at developing an agency-wide policy. It's in process right now, that is going to look at how we effectively look at local capacity development. We envision the policy being able to unify the principles and approaches that guide all of our local capacity building. And of course, that would be then adapted to how we work in the higher education field and with higher education institutions. And so in line with that local approach, you asked about kind of what are some of the shifts we're seeing. And I think that it is really in how do we help the higher education institutions and those stakeholders that support those institutions in country really develop, again, to be more self-reliant and to really become a partner both in their workforce development and leadership, but also in the development of their own countries. So we're shifting a little bit from our partnerships being led more as a our university and U.S. partnerships being more a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage, as we like to say. So it's really about two-way learning, mentoring U.S. universities, mentoring with local higher education institutions. We really think that higher education systems are just as critical as individual peoples and leaders. They contribute to the educational policies and norms. They are the organizations that deliver and benefit from higher education. And it's also about they're creating the individuals who create and operationalize and implement and systematize policies and norms at a country level. And also the people that are coming out of those systems, they're clearly training and they're leaders of the future. And then just one last point on this, I think a big part of how we see our higher education work, and I think it's always been that way, but even more so now, is really what does that look like on a cross-sectoral basis? So agriculture, democracy, of course, education, health, et cetera, and really looking at research, really looking at our higher education work in cross-sectorally, as well as cross-regionally. Since FY14, since fiscal year 14, we've had nearly 900 projects that have engaged higher education as a partner or a beneficiary across all of those sectors. So that's just kind of how we approach our higher education capacity development, which of course is critical. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Julie. So, Guillermo, you just heard Julie say that, they're trying to work their way, out of a job. Your website says that 80% of traditional universities will be out of a job by 2030. Could you tell us what you're doing about that, or how does that motivate you in your approach at Territorium Life?
Yeah, so we strongly believe that there's a need of a transformation in higher education. So that's why that's on our website. We believe that the way of transforming higher education is not only focusing in the traditional way we see higher ed with credit hours, with a degree, but also thinking about the results of that process. So if we go backward, and that's what motivators at Territorium is, how can we unleash that power of learning by focusing on those results? And a result is that you normally go to an institution looking forward for having a better job or getting a job or even becoming an entrepreneur. So what about making a transformation in which instead of focusing on the credit hours that you go to an institution, what about thinking about the results? And a result can be measured with the skills that you're developing. So a lot of what we do in Territorium, we are an AI-powered digital platform focused on skills development, on understanding gaps of those skills on the students so that we can recommend them learning pathways so that they can develop those skills. And we believe that universities have everything for that transformation. They have multiple ways, multiple learning experiences, multiple pathways. It's that only we need to make some small changes, that those small changes can become big changes as a result and as an impact that will make them focus on these skills and also focus on helping people to move towards jobs. And that's our passion at Territorium. We created this just with the focus of helping people to move forward into jobs. Higher education is the way of creating economic development, social welfare. So that's how we see the transformation.
Great. Thank you so much, Guillermo. So, Doug, before you founded Sintana Education, you were the founder of Laureate Education, which had been at the time and probably still is the world's, well, maybe not still is, but was the world's largest network of universities, right? Serving more than 1 million students and I believe 30 countries, maybe 80 or so campuses. So, as you were exiting that opportunity, what made you create Sintana? I mean, you could have been golfing, you could have run for office, you could have, got PhD. I mean, the whole, you had this huge range of possibilities. How did you land on Sintana?
Well, I think, Julia, it really was a function of unfinished work. The work at Laureate taught me so much about what it means to scale with quality. And a lot of what we did then is similar to what we're doing now, which is really capacity building, especially in the private university arena, which outside of the United States is still much less developed. There's still many countries that either don't have much in the way of private universities, or the private universities are very, very small. And in that case, it just means that one of the key pillars that's available for capacity creation and for innovation in a country just doesn't exist or is constrained. So in the case of Laureate, we had a model for how to approach building capacity through investing in and acquiring universities. And we did that, as you said, in almost 30 countries. The unfinished work is that wherever we went, we always found universities that loved what we were doing and wanted to be a part of it, but really weren't available or interested in being acquired as part of that. And so Sintana is really more of a network than a global company. And it's a network of universities that each have a common commitment to scaling with quality in order to create new options and bring innovation to their community. And of course, we ended up doing that in partnership with Arizona State. So in that sense, that was an irresistible proposition to me when you say, why would I want to do it? To not only bring all the experience that the team that I developed and I learned all those years or developed all those years, but also to bring access to resources from Arizona State, which is, I think, emblematic of this idea that you can be large and excellent at the same time. And I think that's really what's needed when we think about the impediments to access in the world. Cost is certainly at the very top of the list, but other impediments include regulatory framework and rigidity, includes just tradition and the traditional nature of many universities. That's an obstacle to innovation and transformation. And then, of course, the preparation of students. If students aren't coming out of high school and ready for learning, then something needs to be done to give them that opportunity. So we saw those as key obstacles, and we came up with ideas and methodologies for how a vibrant, innovative private sector of universities, and I don't mean for profit, I mean private, non state actors, that many of which are nonprofit, would like to grow and expand with quality and create more options for students in their country.
Great. Thank you, Doug. So, Shai, you just heard Doug mention that cost was one of the big impediments, is one of the big impediments to accessing higher education globally. For 13 years, you've been operating University of the People, and it is, as I understand it, tuition free. So, has it always been tuition free? And, was this, how did you focus on that? Or was this your operating principle when you decided to found University of People? And how has that changed over time?
So University of the People is a non-profit, tuition-free, as you said, accredited American online university. And the idea is that there are, according to UNESCO, 100 million students who soon will not have seats in the available universities. Beyond that, there are millions of people who cannot afford higher education, as you said, and as Doug said, because of the cost of higher education, the tuition. And we believe that there wasn't a better reason for the invention of the internet than bringing education to them, using the power of technology, using everything that is available for free on the internet and volunteers to cut down dramatically the cost of higher education and pass it to the students. So we are charging now the students $120 per each end of course exam, which turn out to be $4,800 for a full BA. And we are able to do it because, as I said, the technology, because of volunteers, because we operate from every part of the world where we can get quality, but at a minimal price. And we are building a structure where we're trying to show other universities that higher education can be with quality, affordable, and accessible to all. And with our financial model, we are sustainable. The operation is sustainable from this amount of money. But I think that the point beyond that is to show or to give access to those who have no other opportunity and to make it in a way that others can do as well. So, we have now 44,000 students. We double every year. And we expect to have 100,000 a year from now. But, I was talking about 100 million. So 100,000 is actually a small fraction of the need. And I'm sure that others can do the same. And we are actually paving the way to other universities, to governments in developing countries to do the same where there is a shortage of seats. So we're trying to be able to build a model that will be replicable and will solve the issue.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So obviously we're in a time of a pandemic, and there's a bit of a discussion pretty much in most of our business discussions, which has to do with how much of these changes that we've seen recently are permanent and how much are temporary in this notion of quote unquote going back to normal. um, uh, Guillermo, would you like to comment on how you think the pandemic has changed higher education globally, or if you'd prefer to focus in on a particular country or school or an example, feel free to do that. But the point of the question is what's permanent and what's temporary, and how you see this playing out over the long term.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has accelerated the process of transformation. So before the pandemic, we in several universities and institutions around the world, we were talking about creating flexible curriculum, letting students come and go while they get micro certification so they can show it to the job market, so that they can move forward and get jobs. But what happened is that pandemic has accelerated the process, not just because we are online, but mostly because now we need a way to reskill and upskill people to a new economy. This new economy was already coming, the digital economy, but now it also has accelerated. There are much need of people on jobs related to this digital economy. And what we are seeing is that these transformations are accelerating. I will give you an example in Latin America, in Colombia. We work with SENA, that is like the biggest, I will say, like community college system. If we compare it to the US, they have 2 million students, and they serve around 9 million people through the year, also in several types of courses. And they were already thinking in their 5 to 6 years transformation to begin to launch some flexible curriculum in which students can get a micro certification, and that micro certification will help them to gain credits for like a degree, or a 2-year or even a 4-year degree. And now COVID accelerated the process, just because just in that country, they're looking for 200,000 more software developers, just as an example. And they needed ways to reskill these people and do not wait for a 4-year degree on software engineering. So what we have seen is that COVID is accelerating this process, and what we will be seeing in the future, and we are also seeing it in the US. We just saw this Reimagining Workforce Preparation grant that the Department of Education launched, that is focused on helping universities and community colleges to transform into, I will say, a competency-based or a skill-based education. So that's my point of view around the pandemic.
Shai, what do you think?
I look at it slightly differently. The major higher education is not going to be the same. And the main reason, there are a few reasons. The main reason is a lot of people, because of the recession that followed the pandemic, and because so many people all over the world are lost or are going to lose their jobs, will not be able to pay their kids and themselves for higher education. Second, governments are going to cut the budget of universities because in most parts of the world, the easiest countries are getting into recession, the easiest place to cut budget is higher education. But also there is another side to it. All universities, or most universities, almost all universities had to go online. Well, they shut down their courses and went online. Well, if they did it properly, and many of them did not do it properly because Zoom, 2 hours of Zoom is not online learning, but those who did it properly realized that there is amazing power in online. It can be flexible. People can sit with students from around the world. They can study at their pace. They can do it if they're multitasking while doing other things. And a lot of students would like to study online. So I think that online is going to stay there after the pandemic. However, saying that, I think that a lot of university won't be able to survive after the pandemic, because if less students are able to go to college, and if government cut the budget, how many universities can stay by having 20% less of their budget, with having students, with having unions, etc.? So they will have to change. And the way to change, from my perspective, I believe the only way to change is to move partially online and pass the saving, because online does not cost as much as a face-to-face education, and pass it to the students. So I think that the world of higher education will be changed. There will be the elite universities that will always stay there. There will be a cheaper quality options like ourselves, like University of the People, but every other university, and that's the overwhelming majority of the universities, will have to to ask themselves what is unique about themselves and what is the price point for this opportunity. So if you are North Dakota University and you can say, well, I accommodate all the local students and I can even offer jobs to the graduate locally, this is great. What's the price point for it? If I am the best university with they teach ancient Greek, that's great. Okay, what's the price point for it? But I'm saying that right now, where most of the universities, especially in the US, have pretty much quite an expensive offering to the students, I don't think it will last, because students, as I said, will not be able to pay, and the only way to survive is to cut the cost, to pass it to the students, and have a price point that is relevant to your offering.
So, Doug, Santana's right in the middle of that, right? Visiting with universities around the world. How would you respond? Where do you put yourself based on what Carlos and Shai just said? What's, the future, I suppose. I think you guys are both bringing up questions, which is the future of higher education and what institutions will live and which ones die and under which circumstances. How do you see that, Doug?
Sure. Well, I don't think that it's going to be as much about the recession. Shai, you mentioned a number of I think, powerful points, but the recession, which is, depression coming because of COVID and then lingering, and then will be gone. And I think the question is what behaviors will change along the way. I think about the last pandemic I experienced when I was spending time in Asia, which was SARS, and how at that point, the birth of radical consumer adoption of Alibaba and Tencent and Baidu came during that period of time. Not because it was a recession, maybe because people were irritated that things were too costly, but mostly because consumer behavior changed. People could suddenly press a button on their computer or their phone, and they would get what they needed more conveniently, and indeed, yes, at a lower price. And so I think this is a moment for that as well. Earlier, I mentioned impediments to increased access, and chief amongst them was tradition and regulation. Those two things tend to be a little bit connected. When I saw 200 million students go online overnight in China, and of course, China was the first to experience the pandemic, this pandemic, and therefore a good place to observe what they went into before the rest of the world what they experienced before the rest of the world. And obviously their level of preparation and organization was remarkable, but still to be thrown overnight into this level, I think it showed, first of all, that tradition was set aside out of necessity. And regulations, of course, immediately were made flexible because they had to be. And now people they see the power and the change in technology. In that sense, though, I am a little bit more optimistic for the future of the institution called a university, because while they will be radically transformed, and in that sense, I do agree with Guillermo and Shai, they provide a service that is not just the delivery of knowledge. Whether it's a yellow pill that would teach you a foreign language, there's a lot more to what's provided in this education experience. And for young students, a safe place to go and be and to mature, the opportunities for internships, for better matching of skills against the market demands. And the labor workforce is going to go through changes that are actually much more radical than anything that we're experiencing right now. The pandemic of the future is automation, and that's going to reduce and change jobs in a very radical way. I think that universities are actually well positioned if they innovate, if they are sufficiently open to doing things that are totally different and transformational. I think that they can really provide assistance to millions of students in their journeys towards finding their place in the workforce of the future.
Well, of course, I agree with that, needless to say. But anyway, all very interesting. So, Julie, how does USAID, see this pandemic changing higher ed institutions? And in particular, how have you guys pivoted? Have you changed your approach, your strategy, accelerating funding in some way or in another region? I mean, tell us about, what do you see as you look across the world as it relates to higher ed capacity, and how has that influenced your approach?
Sure. First, let me just say, with listening to our panelists here today, I'm inspired at the future of higher education, the disruptive innovation that all of you all are bringing, and it makes me hopeful for our goal of working ourselves out of a job. So I just want to thank you for that, for the inspiration, as well as for the service to all the people that we're all trying to help. And listening to access, scalability, results-oriented skill development is really helpful and very inspiring. So at USAID, obviously, COVID has had a huge impact on every way that we work, from our field staff and our country partners, to reevaluating a lot of what my co-panelists here are talking about, which is, what are the innovations? Obviously the pandemic has been hugely disruptive in everyone's life, and yet, as folks have pointed out, it also presents opportunity for transformation and opportunity for innovation. And so, thankfully, we've had a long history of going back to the 70s of kind of distance learning. Many of the places we work are the really, really hard places in the world, where we're trying to reach the most vulnerable, particularly with our basic education work. But it's obviously had a huge and severely disruptive impact on higher education systems around the world. We've actually just concluded a landscape review of 144 different higher education systems and institutions about how they've responded in 24 of our partner countries across 5 regions. And that will be coming out and be public soon. So stay tuned for that. That'll be available on our Education Links website. But we've also seen that higher education institutions have been responsible for the innovation and the research to produce everything from protective equipment to masks and shields and ventilators and hand washing stations. But they've also been a critical community engagement and support network. I think all of the points the panelists are making are absolutely true. our job is to work with our partner countries to help them create more resilient systems that include, some of the innovations the panelists are talking to here. But at the end of the day, and I think all of them have something interesting to provide and perspective. But at the end of the day, we're still studying and ensuring that our partner countries have the best knowledge that's available. Have been working closely with all of our partners, both at the donor level, with the private sector, at the multilateral level, to mobilize resources, both human as well as financial. But I think distance learning is also going to be a key part of the response for the entire education system. So hopefully you all will have an opportunity to take a look at this landscape analysis that will hopefully provide some insights to us all about where to go and what kind of resiliency we need to continue to build into systems.
Well, thank you, Julie. So Shai and Doug and Guillermo, for any of you. So, if I'm hearing Julie correctly, one of the approaches that USAID did in light of the pandemic was, first of all, to get a handle on the, on the overall landscape, right? And trying to understand what's going on, and in some sense going to the past, right? Going back to the good old days of distance education, where actually there were these broad networks set up that allowed different educational models. Shai, both you and Guillermo have a fully online model, and same with you. Well, Doug, you've got a big component of digital. Have you guys changed your model? Have you changed your the way you approach the market since COVID?
Yeah, I think that one of the changes that we have gone through in the last 12 years. When we started, everything was text-based. The idea was that we have students in developing countries. There is no broadband to many of them, and in order to enable the maximum access, so we didn't use, it was text-based, so any internet connection you can study with us. Along the years, we started introducing videos because we just felt that by not having videos, we actually punish those that can enjoy the richness of the internet, and they don't do so because we force them to use text only. COVID brought us more people who needed text or did not have a broadband. So we make sure now that anytime we have video, we also have the text. So you don't have to have video. This is one change that we made. I think that the major change, though, was that the entire organization will be much more open and try to address issues that come up with the COVID, and whether it is people that are sick that ask, to delay their exams and to study, get more time. So there are a lot of personal issues that we're trying to help students with. It's hard with the number of students that we have, and not always, because if someone is sick and is just stop communicating with us, we don't know that that's the situation. But I think that that's the major change. In terms of our pedagogy, we haven't changed our pedagogy, and in terms of the number of students, we're just growing faster than we did before, which means that we need to recruit more instructors and we need everything to be bigger, but that's growing rather than pandemic issue. Yeah.
Sure. Guillermo, anything you want to add there? How territorial life has been changed or is changing, or maybe not at all?
So I will say we have been accelerating, I will say. So COVID brought for us a lot of universities that now we are collaborating with them that are seeing not only like delivering a traditional transcript and more like creating a comprehensive learning record for their students so that they can be easier for them to get a job, to show the skills that they are developing, to use the multiple learning experiences that they have. So I will say that the major change that during the pandemic is that how we are integrating more within the university ecosystem. I can give several examples on how, for example, we're working with some community colleges in the US that are interested on having all their learning experiences within an online ecosystem, having a one-stop shop for their users in which we can show all the skills that they are developing. I will say that a major change we have seen on our customers, a lot of things that we were pushing in the past, now we are seeing them with the will to make the change. That's what I can say. From a lot of traditional universities, now they are saying, hey, we need to change. And that's something that has been accelerating our growth.
Great, thank you, thank you. Doug, you mentioned earlier the importance of government regulation and what you're seeing a change in China. Given your experience, your previous experience, and now what you're seeing at Santana, could you compare and contrast a little bit for the audience how you see different governments in different regions or different countries being more accepting of digital teaching and learning, less accepting? How do you see, if comparing across regions, how do you see the landscape from where you sit?
Sure. Well, obviously, some countries were already further along in accepting and supporting digital education, and in some cases, even more flexible academic models. In the US, the experimentation with competency-based education and online learning, those are related, but they're not the same thing. And you could see many countries that would be willing and ready to accept online, but might not be ready for something like competency-based, which even in the US has taken a long time to be accepted and isn't even as fully embraced as you would think by now. So think of that spectrum of, let's say, readiness or preparation. If I mapped the countries around the world, because this is so much of what we do at Santana, we would see countries where online is fully equivalent and unrestrained. We'd see countries where the percentage of instruction that can be done online was limited. And by the way, 20 years ago in the US, in the work I was doing at Laureate, universities were not allowed to deliver more than 50% of a degree content online. And I remember that because at the time we became one of the first 25 pilot university programs permitted by the Department of Education to teach 100% online. 20 years is a long time, but it's actually shocking to me that it's that recent that we wouldn't even have allowed that in the United States. Well, of course, there are many other countries where that still is a limitation today. Then the pandemic hit. And what's really amazing to me is just about every single country that I know with the most disparate regulatory systems possible, they all ultimately relaxed the limitations and said, do what you have to do for students. And now the universities were not very prepared, and the less embracing the government and regulators were of online, the less prepared the universities would have been. But the fact is the governments did what they have to do. And I actually give them a lot of credit for that. Some of them may have taken a few weeks longer. Some of them may have gotten there with more angst or anxiety, but they did almost everywhere allow that to be the case. And that's good because remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we all were thinking in weeks as to how long this might last, maybe because we saw the amazing experience in China. But of course, for the rest of the world, that has not proven to be the case. And indeed, I think we're still looking at, for some countries, what could be as much as a year before they have likely, we hope, solutions to this, medical solutions to this problem. So people really need to be girded for that. And I think governments have been incredibly responsive. And I think that really opens the door to ask them to consider what was learned during this period of time and why just go right back to the old regulations after this changes. And I think for many countries, they will be very sympathetic to the argument of what's been learned and what could be done better and how this becomes a catalyst for better options for students.
Right. Does anybody else, does anybody have any different perspectives on that? Or does everybody share Doug's view on how the regulation is changed or not changed as a result of COVID? If you agree, that's okay. But if you disagree, it's better.
I don't. This is Julie. I don't disagree at all. However, I do think at USA, one of our biggest jobs is to help partner governments become resilient, which is exactly what Doug is talking about, and exactly what Carlos was talking about as well. So I think that is going to be a regulatory, systemic kind of approach that I think governments are going to be even more willing to take on, because of this resiliency factor and the very varied audiences and populations of students that they have to work with. So I just wanted to add that thought. I couldn't agree more, and we're excited to be a part of that.
Great, great. So Shai, notice that you've created University of the People in Arabic. And from what I can tell, it looks like it's focused on specific, perhaps refugees that might be Arabic speaking. And I was just wondering, were you trying to create that in order to serve refugees per se, or to more demonstrate the notion of teaching in other languages other than English? Can you talk a little bit about Mina and what led to that?
Well, I think, okay, first of all, we decided to launch University of the People in Arabic because we were approached by hundreds of thousands of Arabs, mainly refugees. In the last 2 years alone, 125,000 Syrian approached the university, but they couldn't make it because of the language, because we only taught in English. And as such, we decided to open a division in Arabic that will run mainly by refugees, mainly for refugees. So to have a solution to this incredible challenge of or crisis of the higher education of refugees in the Middle East. By the way, it's not only Syrian, it's Syrian, Iraqi, Yemenite, Libyan. So there is a crisis in the Middle East of higher education, and we felt that it's our obligation to try and give a solution. So that was the reason behind building, developing and offering University of the People in Arabic. And we just started a couple of weeks ago with 500 students. The first term in English, we had 180. So we're starting 3 times bigger than what we started originally, the English. But it is to offer a solution for the Arab students. We started with only associate degree in business administration. While they study in Arabic, we also offer them English as a second language. So the goal is that after 2 years, when they get their associate degree, they can transfer to the English part of the university and be part of our global community. I think that, sorry?
We're running out of time, so I wanted to ask one quick roundup question. So I apologize for interrupting. And I'll start with you, Guillermo, which is, if you could change one thing which is outside of your control, to make higher education capacity more available to students around the world, what would it be? And if you could do this in just a few words or not, then I'll just kind of go around the panel. Change one thing, what would that be?
Very good question. So I will say make curriculum flexible.
Excellent, excellent. Doug?
I would say make governance flexible. That universities need to make decisions faster because the world's changing faster. And I think the biggest impediment, decision-making within universities, even taking aside governance and external limitations they may face.
Julie?
Oh boy, that is a really tough question. I would think that more girls go to universities.
Nice.
Excellent answer. Shai?
I would make higher education accessible and affordable to every student that is qualified for higher education.
Well, great, great. Well, on behalf of ASU and GSV, I just want to thank my fantastic group of panelists. I so appreciated your answers and your different perspectives, and hope we'll all see each other in person one of these days very soon. Thank you so much for your time.